Why, hello there. Today we'll be reading A History of Us, Chapter 34, titled French Indochina. There was a beautiful country to the south of China, a country that had been ruled by France for about 100 years. The French called the land Indochina. The people who lived there called it Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. Does that sound unusual for a Western nation to rule an Asian nation? It wasn't unusual at all in the days before World War II. Britain ruled China, the Netherlands ruled Indonesia, and the United States ruled the Philippine Islands. That kind of foreign rule is called colonialism or imperialism. Most people knew that colonialism wasn't fair. We had once been an English colony and we hadn't liked it at all. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that the nations should determine their own form of government. As soon as World War II ended, we granted independence to the Philippines, but some Asian countries had to fight to become free. India's leaders fought with hunger strikes and nonviolent protests. In Vietnam, they fought with weapons. Vietnam had a leader named Ho Chi Minh. As a young man, he had visited in England, the United States, and France. He knew the Western ways. He had even been a poet and a photographer, and he even spoke many languages. Back in 1919, he had tried to get President Woodrow Wilson to help the people of Southeast Asia gain their freedom. Wilson didn't respond. When Ho learned of Philippine independence, he was encouraged. He wrote 8 letters to the President Truman asking for help in making Vietnam free. Those letters were also never answered. Perhaps Truman never saw them. Well, we don't know about that. We do know that in 1945, Ho Chi Minh founded the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Some American military men were present at the independence ceremonies. The Star-Spangled Banner was played by a Vietnamese band, and Ho Chi Minh spoke words from the Declaration of Independence. When American planes unexpectedly flew overhead, everyone cheered. Hold up. There we go. Okay. But the French... Oh, no. Ooh, it's not good. I think I just went 2 pages ahead. Excuse us. We have technical difficulties here. Okay. But the French didn't want Vietnam to be independent. France had lost the country when Japanese soldiers invaded during World War II. Now that the war was over, the French wanted their old empire back. Ho Chi Minh stood in the way. He was a hero to his countrymen. He had fought against the French and then the Japanese. Now he wanted to keep France from controlling Vietnam again. The French asked the United States to help them fight Ho and his forces, called Viet Minh. They had said Ho was a communist, and he was. He had gone to Russia and studied communism there. He believed in freedom for his country, which didn't necessarily mean freedom for the individuals inside of the country. Ho was an independent kind of communist. His goal was to free Vietnam from all outsiders, but he needed help. When the Chinese communists began sending supplies to Ho, he was happy to have their aid. Perhaps if Ho Chi Minh had not been a communist, we would have stayed out of the affair, but we soon sent military advisors to help the French. Then we gave France $10 million US a year to fight Ho and the Viet Minh. That was when Harry Truman was president. Now, there's a sidebar over here, okay? This says, for much of its early history, Vietnam was ruled by Chinese warlords. When Vietnam rejected Chinese rule, it kept much Chinese culture. Both China and Vietnam were Confucian countries. We'll see about Confucius on the next page. In the 20th century, China turned to communism, and so did Vietnam. Now we have a picture below here of 2 people. On the left here, we have Mao Zedong, the leader of Communist China, who sent supplies to neighboring Vietnam to aid the forces of Ho Chi Minh, who is on the right here. Civil war between communist North and the pro-Western South. Remember the situation in Korea? Was this the same? We were now out of Korea, and many of our nation's anti-communists believed that Vietnam was the place to take another stand against world communism. Those who wanted to send bombers and fighting troops were called hawks, and those who didn't want to get involved were called dubs. President Eisenhower said that if we let Vietnam become communist, it would be like watching a row of dominoes fall. The first domino, it would set off the others, and those would set off more. Soon, all of Asia would be communist. Eisenhower's advisors were hawks, and they urged him to fight. But none of them really understood Southeast Asia. Hardly anyone in America did. We'd fired our Chinese experts, who might have helped. Eisenhower was wary. I'm convinced that no military victory is possible there, he said. Remember that statement. You will read more about Vietnam. Now, of course, we're going to take a look at this picture. Ho Chi Minh led Vietnam to independence from French rule and then became president of Communist North Vietnam. Oh, I believe that is the end. Just make sure. Is that true? Wait, what happened? Oh no. Oh, we did have some technical difficulties. You read all of them, right? Did we read this? No, we didn't. Oh no. Oh no. Okay. I'm not going to start the video over. I'm just going to read it. So, yeah, so this was the page. This was the page with yeah, so remember this? Yeah, this is the page after that. I'm so sorry. By 1953, when Eisenhower was president, we were spending $400 million a year, US, to help the French in Vietnam, and before long, almost twice that amount. But it wasn't enough. The Viet Minh kept winning. Vice President Richard Nixon and our top military leaders urged the president to send American bombers to Vietnam. Eisenhower, however, refused. The French prepared for a major battle. They were confident, but they shouldn't have been. Their army, they were beaten and trapped, and most of the surviving soldiers died at a terrible jungle march. That was more than enough for the French people. They showed in elections that they were ready to get out of the Southeast Asia. And since France is a democracy, the people prevailed. A peace conference was held in Geneva, or Geneva, I don't know how it's pronounced, in Switzerland. Vietnam was divided into two sections, North and the South. The division was meant to be temporary. Most of the food-growing regions were in the South. Ho Chi Minh was the leader of North Vietnam. He was now a great popular hero. After all, he had driven the French out of the country. South Vietnam's leaders were chosen by France. According to the Geneva Agreement, elections were to be held within 2 years to reunite the country. Those elections were never held. The South Vietnamese leaders wouldn't allow them. They knew Ho Chi Minh would win. Soon, oh no, here we go. Now this is Confucius. It's a whole thing about Confucius. So Confucius. Traditionally, the Vietnamese followers of the ideas were followers of the ideas of Confucius. It is hard for most Western peoples to understand that Confucianism is not a religion in the same sense as Judaism, Christianity, or even Islam. Confucius said, I am simply one who loves the past and is diligent in investigating it. Confucius was a teacher who taught morality, or the way to a good life. That way is called Tao. As you can see right here, it's spelled Tao, but it's pronounced Tao. He found its guidelines by studying the wisdom of the past. Americans and other Westerners do much thinking of the future, about invention and progress, innovation. Confucians tried to perfect systems that have been tried over many times. These are very different ways of looking at the world. This is a statue of Confucius. the man who taught a way to the good life. So then we would have read this page. And then that would be the end of the chapter. Yay! So, thank you for staying with me this long, and I hope you did enjoy learning about this. I'm sorry if it was a bit boring, but I really hope that it wasn't, that my tone added some depth to the recording. So thank you. Thank you very much for watching. And have a Whipadap day. Give me a second. I need to learn how to